there, here, that's an edition by Rodney Graham, the Canadian artist, and it's a portrait of Tiny Tim, who was a legendary singer in New York. He was playing in bars, but what is nice is that it's printed on this tiny LSD paper.
Amazing.
So it's all kind of LSD paper.
Very fragile. Is it very fragile?
Yeah, it's very fragile. It's without LSD, but I can put it addition. And then this is a gift by Nathalie Du Pasquier, the great artist, designer, one of the founding members of Memphis. This is Alessandro Cicoria. That's Reba Maybury, a British artist, a dominatrix. So she asked one of her submissive to make guitar drawings. And so this is what this man made. So it's beautiful.
Wow. Amazing.
Guitar with a
with a hand, with a fist.
Yeah, exactly. This is the Paolina Oloska, is an edition bought in London at Camden.
Yes.
This is Martin Soto Clement, a Mexican artist. Is a gift when he came to visit me in Vienna. So he made on the puking bag, he made this drawing of him seated in that airplane. This is a small edition of Hans Bellmer.
That's beautiful.
That I bought for, I don't know, 100 euros. Okay. That's a gift of Simone Forti, the great dancer and choreographer, who is now like very old. That's again Nathalie Du Pasquier. This is a paper that she used to put on the canvas to rip it off. That's Michael Snow, the filmmaker. That's another gift of Xavier Bali, an artist from Catalonia who's continuing the work of Onkawara of the Faxes. I'm Still Alive. That's Jonathan Monk, who's an homage to an Italian artist called Salvo that now became very popular. This is a painting by a unknown painter that I found in a flea market that I really like. And Lawrence Winner. And this is another American artist, that's Talia Chetrit Salvo. Niki de Sanfal is the funeral of the dead.
That's really good.
And this is this Willem de Roy, and this is a gift of an artist from Argentina, Nicolas Guagnini. And then there are a few other stuff here. This Andrea Branzi. And some yeah.
So how many years of collecting is that?
I mean, these are, I've been always kind of into books and edition ephemera. I would say the majority are gifts, but already when I started studying, since I was mainly interested in conceptual art, and conceptual art is, of course, the medium of books, magazines, posters, ephemera was quite essential. And I really like the idea that you can make an exhibition with no money, just using the space of a page, or like doing posters, postcards, and send them out. I found kind of an exciting way, especially when you're young and you don't have money, to give you a possibility of to do things, and also quite accessible. And
So this is amazing, because it's kind of like a lifelong commitment. It's not like you woke up one day and said, oh, I want to be interested in art, but it looks like you actually have been quite profoundly interested.
Yeah, in a way, yes. It's been always maybe linked to life interest, like very personal motivations. I remember, I've been quite lucky, because I had a very good and intense education. So I travel a lot with my parents, and my mom, my great-grandfather was an artist. So my mom grew up in a very lively kind of cultural context. My father is a psychoanalyst. Instead, he basically made him by himself. So he's very greedy of knowing things. So really into cinema, music, theater, like traveling and so on. And so that definitely was quite was quite influential, even if was in a way too much that I at a certain point I thought maybe I would like to become an architect, because I was really into, as a kid I was really into playing with Legos, big Legos. I was always building stuff, but then I realized that you had to study a lot of mathematics. There was all these kind of things, and I was allergic to that. So then I switched to art. But when I decided really to enroll at the university and studying art history, the main motivation was a book, The Diary of Andy Warhol, and because I just thought that these people were having an interesting life. There is a mix of people quite from different disciplines, doing urgent things, very obsessed on what they were doing. Plus, they were having a life that was not about going to an office every day wearing a suit. So to me, that was a very important thing. So I said, okay, I want to be part of that.
But it's also probably like they're having fun, right?
Having fun, yeah, to me is I think is important to live a life a bit like in this sort of poetic dimension, which of course was naive when I was thinking is a typical like adolescence or late teen sort of thought when you have your idols is like this sort of rock and roll punk and thing. But in a certain way, I still believe in that. So as you said, it's something that has not been relegated to that part of my life. That of course, like as a grown-up adult, is different, but still, and that's why my even background is very kind of mixed between like founding and running a magazine, a publishing house, organizing, I don't know, projects with music, publishing, and doing exhibitions that are really like trying to challenge the notion of what an exhibition is and so on. So I think I've been always quite fascinated by this expanded notion of culture and of collaborate and operating within different contexts and trying to bridge also different crowds. And maybe it's
interesting because I think somehow what you said in terms of your interests maybe lying more in performance originally or in art that is immaterial, and then like taking now a little bit through the collection, which as you say, it's even like it's probably a small part of a collection that's much larger, that probably is, you said, primarily in books and ephemera.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the kind of visual output of that kind of interest, it's more text and it's more like words. But then words still have this capacity to become images or visual. They have this capacity to communicate. So do you ever think about these notions of text, note?
Yeah, definitely. Also because when I think about exhibitions, I often think visually, but then the act of really curating exhibitions to me is very similar to the act of writing in space. So it's true that this constant parallel between word images and the idea of thinking about the space of a book as a page. So a page of a book could be like a wall in a three-dimensional space, has been always quite present in me, and that's still today. To me, has been always quite productive to get inspired by things I was seeing in a given context, and then trying always in this sort of speculative way and ongoing speculative question thinking, what happened if we take that thing or we use part of that thing in that way, and you kind of put together. Even like my last show in Vienna was heavily influenced by a theater piece, dance piece by Giselle Wien called Crowd. So I went to see in this theater this performance, which was about an hour and a half long, and was all about the rave time, with dancers dancing non-stop, but the music was playing non-stop, also very loud, like in a club. And at the end, all these bodies movement, they were sweating, smoking, drinking. So at the end of the show, the stage remained full of these leftovers of traces of objects of these bodies, and I thought, wow, this would be the ideal. Would be cool if this would be the scenario for an exhibition, but also with the music like playing so loud, and because you feel completely immersed into another state. It's like being in a state of hallucination just through the presence of music, a certain kind of visual landscape. And then from that, I had the idea for an exhibition, because I was so much like stone in a positive way. I was so high after this piece that I said, wow. And he stayed here, and he immediately, so that was quite visual. But then in terms of the way, the adaptation from an image into like the space, there was a lot of editing, which often you can apply, of course, to words, but as well to images or sound. And but in general, this idea of translation and what is lost in translation, but in the sense of unexplored things or unexpected, this. And that's why I also very into the idea of improvising by starting by a structure, and basically also the whole idea at Macro was having a structure very precise, also very present, with the idea of then dismantling it in order to produce a movement and to produce an improvisation. And again, this was, for instance, quite influenced by Simone Forti, her attitude towards dance. She has, of course, a great knowledge of the dance vocabulary, but then she kind of decided to put it aside in a way. Of course, it's always with you, but then to create something different, and to really improvise. And so the idea of improvising could produce a complete chaos and nonsense if there is no structure and no consciousness of awareness of whatever you are kind of addressing. But if you do it with that spirit, it's still also quite will be always very challenging and exciting, even if you are like 90 years old, as I don't know, as Simone.
Is there something about institutional framework that requires maybe more structure than if you're not in an institutional framework? Or actually, do you think these lines are very blurred?
I mean, personally, I always had this, since we were creating the magazine, and to me the magazine and the publishing enterprises and institution itself, the idea of this sort of ambivalent relationship with the idea of structure and certain dynamics of also of power related to the notion of structure has been always quite center. And in terms both of kind of resistance or like, but also of being propositive, not resistance, not with the idea of demolishing it, but more in the idea of altering it, like corrupting or like modifying in a productive way, because I feel that yeah, as I said before, with no structure could be also chaotic. I have the tendency to lose myself quite easily, so to me it's also mentally important to have it's a bit like if you invite an artist and to a show where you say there is no theme, you can do what you like. It's very, for any artist, quite difficult because you need always like a point of departure. And so you can, if no one is giving to you, then you can create them as an exercise for yourself. It's like, it's a process of thinking and of working.
But you moved from, let's say, grassroots forms of organizing, like with a magazine.
I mean, I founded Nero with 3 friends in 2004. 3 of us were studying together art history, and the other one was more into another thing. And each of us had very different also interests, mainly me, art, others more cinema and music, experimental music, and Nero still exists. Of course, I'm less involved now. At the beginning was just a free magazine, only in Italian. They became in English. Then we started to publish books, and then it became a sort of media agency, and now as also publishing blog. It grew up. It became like the umbrella for many, many activities. And so while I was doing that, I started curating like as a freelance, mainly in Rome, because it was the city where I spent most of my time, and that I never left. I mean, I left at a certain point, but for many years I didn't want to leave because, you know, Nero was like our baby and was still a baby and completely independent. We never get any like public support. And so the curating was the editing kind of processes, and then the curating. And the curating, I also, as a freelance, started to curate within institutions like museums or like a Palais de Tokyo. But the first time I really started to work in institutions was when I moved to Vienna in 2014, end of 2013, and where I spent 6 years working at Kunsthalle Wien. But before my,
So what happens then? You get a job. Like you are used to operating in this kind of amazing networked way, and then you get a job. And so what do? Do you change the job, or do you challenge it?
Of course, that was to me a very, first of all, I was not looking for a job, and I was not even looking to go abroad and to work in institutions. I mean, in my case was always a matter, I think is often the case for a lot of us, is about a chain of connections, of encounters. And so I was invited to do a residency in France in a FRAC in Champagne Ardenne. The director at that time was Florence Derrier. And when I finished the residency, she told me, you know, the director of Kunsthalle Wien, is looking for a curator. I think you should apply because the director is a very smart curator, and I think you could get along with him, and it could be an exciting thing to do. I was a bit skeptical because I never did any application in my life before, and as I told him, then future boss at the time, Nicola Schaffhausen. I even like copied. I didn't know what a cover letter was, so I was in the internet. Just got a cover letter, just to tell you, frankly, what was my level of like how to do application. Was the first ever application in my life, and was quite easy because they just need your CV and this cover letter that I kind of copy and paste from a the standard application cover letter for another completely other field, and there was a huge number of people that candidates, like almost 700 people apply for that position, and then I got that job. So you have to think to respond to your questions. I was not looking for it. Often, people will say, "Oh, I would love to, I don't know, teach in London there."
Yeah.
So I apply and I really do my best. In that case, I didn't expect. When I had the final interview, I even said, "Okay, but I want to continue. I have this magazine and publishing house. It's my project. I don't want to leave it. So I need to spend time in Rome." And so I put a condition sine qua non. If I cannot do that, I'll not take this position. So it was even crazy. But so to me was first a personal challenge. But as you said, when you're used to do what you like, and there is no one telling you, there is any form of kind of restrictions of constraints is different. I was lucky because Nicola Schaffhausen, the head of Kunsthalle, he's really like has a similar attitude like me. Is very intuitive person, no completely non-bureaucratic. So it's true that I got along very well, and was a very important experience because I understood things, and exactly, especially about the difference when you do a freelance exhibition could be the most exciting thing, but it's like writing a poem and then you throw away in the world. The other one is more like writing a book, and there is someone reading and the different chapters, so you can establish, especially with the local community, you can insist on certain things, so people, not of course the occasional travelers or tourists, but people who live there can see a trajectory. And was lucky I had a lot of space. I did many exhibitions in Vienna, and so my main interest was to be able to continue this attitude of experimenting with formats and exhibitions methodology within an institution that I always thought being a kind of jail, where things, it's very complicated. It was complicated, but I felt that I managed to do like projects that still today I'm quite kind of fond of them, because they really they were quite experimental. And the second was maybe to give to focus on solo exhibitions of figures that they never had measure representation. So I thought that was also a kind of political element, to use the opportunity of the institutions to give room to those who didn't get a chance, but again, often including and working with figures that are hard to categorize or to fit into like a precise field, like Charlemagne Palestine, Babette Mangolte, an amazing photographer, DOP of Chantal Ackerman, and director, or Nathalie Du Pasquier. Not at that time, she was completely not known, and she was always mentioned like the woman of Memphis, but no one really pay attention to the artistic practice, and was a huge discovery. Now she's having, I don't know, shows represented by so many galleries. And so yeah, I think is a bit, again, was a bit naive, because I always see, like, as you were saying before, it's true that I had this kind of ambiguous relationship with the institutions, because to me, because we always had with the magazines, no one helped us. And so for us, the museum was not the place to be, but was the place to avoid. And while I think young generations, they're much more, at least maybe in Italy and Rome is what I can feel, much more open to have this kind of dialogue. We were the generation.
They're almost seeking validation from.
Yeah, exactly. Seeking validation, or anyhow, there is less, is a post-ideological generation, even if appear to be very ideological. But so it's a matter of generation. So, I mean, I grew up like in this sort of bipolar condition between the analog and digital time. So on one end, we still have this sort of toughness or like ideology of the previous generation, but at the same time, we are also projected in this actual scenario of the digital age, which is less ideological and more about, okay, the world is capitalism. One is a bit kind of Mark Fisher idea, you know.
Yeah.
The world sucks, so instead of pretending to change it completely, which is you know, a fail utopia as the past demonstrated, let's
20th century, yeah,
without that kind of thinking of touching the sky and to defeat capitalism. But yeah, and so maybe also that is a condition which produce also this kind of this state of, I mean, of being constantly precarious, both economically but also mentally. And but so when you are in that situation, you cannot ever kind of rest and lay down. You're always like in this sort of move of yeah. And to me, is what I feel today, because I mean, of course, when you start to age and to getting older, you tend to lose curiosity. You're less a sponge, and you tend to be more and more on that position, and you start often to become judgmental on things that are not like you. And to me also, again, to me, the fact that I was spending a lot of time with older people, and I always want to meet and spending time with artists, whatever, architects and so on. At the same time, I was hanging out with my peers and friends. Also, you know, this was quite vital. And so now that I'm in that position, I like to hang out a lot with kids or like people that are like 24, 25, because exactly I don't want to ended up being that person myself. And so it's not about faking. So I'm myself and keeping my position, but at the same time, I feel it's not about feeling younger. It's more, otherwise it's impossible, because one thing is reading an article about, you know, Gen Z, whatever. Yeah. One thing is that you spend time, you're going out, you think you really live, and you really then understand, and that can influence also you. So it's really a dialogue. It's not about,
because what you're doing there, you're talking to the future, right? Because they're the people that will be in your position in 20 years time.
Yeah. And of course, you don't do it with this kind of capitalist approach of sucking the data to then reuse it, but more out of simple curiosity. And it's quite rare. And I notice how, yeah, it's not always easy when you're, I don't know, 70 to keep that curiosity that you had when you were, I don't know, 30, 40. And also now that I start to teach, is also, yeah, it's another kind of bridge with
connection.
That.
But so what do you think a museum would look like in like 30 years time? Like let's say a museum like Macro.
I mean, like a museum like Macro, maybe in 30 years will disappear, will be gone.
Right. What
Other
will take
museum,
over? What will be in that building in 30 years? Like a shopping mall or something.
yeah, because also the idea of the software and hardware of the museum, it's very different because the hardware is aging so fast, meaning the architecture, and is also assuming different tones according to the changing of taste and so on. So macro on absolute level is not a fantastic museum, but is intriguing if you see it as a ruin of the 90s architecture. And while the software is different, because the software you could do any sort of things in any sort of space. Could be the most like precise and rational and simple and functional architecture, as well in the most crazy sort of spaghetti whatever thing. And that's, but again, to do that, you need to be responsive to that, which is not always the case. That's why, for instance, at Max in Rome, I always see an overproduction of exhibition, display, and design to kind of resist them. But that become like fighting with a space. Instead, I think instead of heading is about removing. So less thing you put maybe could be a solution instead of pretending that the wall, if a wall is round, it's better that you do something that can react to that instead of pretending that becomes square. Also, because in order to make it square, you have to put like a wall like this that is, first of all, is a bit kind of not nice. Plus, is more expensive, less sustainable. Thinking also about the themes of today. I mean, in general, about what the museum scenario will be in 30 years is really a big question. I think, of course, museum will exist and always, and still today they're the ultimate destination of tourists. We also have to consider that we are advancing, and so what was a modern museum, what a contemporary museum is becoming modern, and so that's also something that, I mean, Pompidou, when I started to study, Pompidou was founded in 1977. When I was studying at the university, I was 2001, 2002. So that museum only had not even 30 years roughly, you know, now as like 58, you know. So it's about being, when you are 30 in your 30s and when you're 58, if you imagine a museum as a person, you would tend to do that. You are approaching, I mean, you're not old, but you are in the third phase of your life. Instead, we think of the Pompidou as a contemporary museum. And so if we think from the perspective of now trying to be now in 2025, so in 2000
let's say 2050, in 25 years.
2055, maybe all these museums will become like modern museums. And I think because it's always a way to look at the world how it was, you know, it's like an index of aesthetic tests. So it's still maybe, to me, they're losing a bit their in terms, if you think about the leisure time we have with the invention of all these entertainment platforms, from like music, Spotify, Netflix, movie, blah, 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 they occupy and they suck a good part of that attention. And also in terms of money, in terms of cost. I mean, if you go to Tate to visit a show, you pay £25. Just one show that maybe would be not even the, it's not really that you get crazy. You go there because you think that going to a museum is a rewarding cultural experience as a person who maybe you do completely something else and you don't work in this field. But then £25 is more or less what you pay for a monthly subscription with Spotify or Netflix. And so if you think not about us, that we are the niche, that maybe a privileged niche in any sense, in a way, but in general, like a general audience, if you have a family, you don't pay £100, and then you say, okay, the collection is for free, but then a lot of investment in terms of advertising, the billboard, what they take, we take as an example, is promoting, is not the collection. They say now there is the show of whatever, Lee Bowery. And that's like exactly the type of strategy that fashion is using. So creating a desire. And so I want to go there, maybe because I'm attracted by the place or by the graphic design or by the name or whatever. And so I think the risk of the museums are really have to face the idea of how to avoid becoming like completely addressing niche, because in fact they are mainly for free, at least in England, the collection, and we're talking about the past, in fact. But what is the new? So what is our field, like more, the temporary exhibitions, the vision of the curator, of the director. Then if you look the numbers, they're tough and they're like a huge impact, because also the life, everything is becoming is more expensive. Is also due to what's happening in our world. I mean, there are wars everywhere, a huge kind of flux of people moving to from one place to another. So there is the world is complicated. I mean, things has been always complicated, but today even more. And so everything, when you visit these biennials or you read the theme or whatever, that is the architectural biennial, art, you always read the same thing, blah, 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 blah. But then there is the real thing, because, okay, let's try to do a biennial without shipping anything. So let's invite people there and we do. Could you do it with architecture biennial? Maybe not. Could you do with art? Yes. Or, but doing for real, not by saying it, because otherwise it feels to me a kind of Catholic attitude that I go to the church and say, I did this, forgive me, I live and I do all this shit. And so I don't know, maybe the problem that I notice now that the museums are too much like following dynamics and procedures that politics is using. So there is a lot of rhetoric, maybe before being less, wasn't such a big industry. There were less people interested in that. That wasn't a niche, but was still like smaller compared to other cultural field. You have more space for failure, experimenting and things. And so that to me is a bit scary and is a bit preventing institutions by really doing something different. Apparently they do, because they say, okay, we give space to minorities of any kind, we pay more attention to certain things that for sure are doing that, but at the same time, the board of museums is still especially in US, is still made of people that made tons of money not in the most healthy way. And so on the opposite, this world, at least I'm talking about the art world, became rich and rich, and it's only about privileged people, plus being going toward that direction. The result is also that the public sector and the politicians looking at this word being a word of privilege and of rich, they say why we have to support with public money. So public institutions are kind of losing also a lot of support. And this also, think of Germany now, but even France. So even countries where they were with a strong socialist agenda of, you know, of thinking about about culture as a toolkit to kind of improve like the community, the life of a community, is now really suffering. And so these huge cuts are also the result of the fact that there is the impossibility or incapability of explaining what's the real situation. So because then all storytelling and narrative is about the exception. So the 1%, people are mentioning, oh, it's that museums, that people, rich collectors, that gallery, but that is the exception. And 99% of the artists, they don't have money, they're completely precarious. Also mentally, this has an effect on also on the mental state and health of a lot of people. And it's even more like serious because on one hand, the impression is all people that are super cool, like boom, 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 and no one is admitting the actual situation. They were doing in this kind of boring rhetoric that you listened during the COVID time that was completely like bullshit, as we are seeing now, because the situation is much more extreme than before. And so yeah.
But if there was a hopeful scenario, what do you think that hopeful scenario would be?
I mean, the hopeful scenario is having a much more like a transformation of certain like entities. For instance, I don't know, the centri sociali, so the squad, the occupied places that for my generation was quite important. Now they don't exist anymore. And as well, like the clubs are becoming completely something else. Think of the clubbing culture. Now the DJs are playing as rock star. So these are moments of shift, and so maybe there are certain kind of, let's say Berghain in Berlin. It's a more influential institutions than any other museums in Berlin. For a certain generation, I would say, goes from the 18 till 45 years. That generation, I think, also like if you look at the Venice Biennale, the music Venice Biennale, they're bringing so this kind of in-betweenness, and which on one hand you can see it in a negative things because okay, we are losing grounds, and this opacity could be good or could be bad, you know. It is up to you and the way you relate to them. And to me that could be also the hopeful, the more positive part, because you can create something different. So if you say, if a club is a museum, then what you know, and it's also about the type of audience. And I think it's over the idea of being like thinking of museums or institutions like these islands where you're like on you have really to and to find the balance between like being detached from reality. So that's important. Otherwise you become an imitation of it. And so it's like running behind a reality that will always win. At the same time, you have to be outside of, in that world, you have to be there in the streets to captivate, to capture everything, what's going on. So to keep your antenna alive. And that's difficult because this is, again, we're touching this kind of bipolar situation. And bipolarity is one of the condition of today. And so culture could be the lithium. And so it's about what's the lithium to solve this.
Because I guess if let's say a young generation of artists is looking at those institutions and is producing work that they can imagine in those institutions, that means that they're kind of just in a vicious circle of kind of reacting to what an institution sees or deems as kind of valuable. But we can be also certain that that's not going to be the work that goes into those institutions. So we can be certain that the work that, you know, hopefully, if we are hopeful, that the work that we will see in 20 years' time is not that work that is made now based on what is in those institutions now.
Right. Sure.
So artist is always, I guess, on the fringes, like art, real work that will make it there is somehow always going to be a kind of on the fringes now.
Yeah, also because artists, they don't, I mean, the way they relate to time is also very different from other kind of cultural practitioners. But no, what I'm saying is that to me, when I talk about institutions, the institutions could be a cinema club. So the cinema club, that maybe the future of the cinema club is not anymore the cinema as we intended, but it could become something closer to what a club was. But of course, being also the dramaturgy of a cinema club, a cinema theater is very specific, a bit like theaters. And I'm not talking about all the theaters, but especially like cinema, you can use the limitations and this kind of completely decline and fall of what we consider being the cinema house that has been now completely occupied by the digital platforms. Instead, you can use that as an opportunity to rethink that and maybe producing something in terms of programming that is closer to the programming of a festival and so on. But it's still like, in terms of architecture, it's still like a cinema theater with a screen and seats. Or maybe you decide to remove the seats and keeping the screen. And that's the same thing happening today with like moving images. And you have so many filmmakers that are like, just because the industry of cinema is now so much kind of, there is no space for the in-between, they ended up showing and working and funded by art institutions. And so when, as a filmmaker, you have to work and show your stuff in a art space, if you are like smart, you cannot give it for granted, but you decide to adapt what was that thing that you have been doing, to adapt to that space, meaning not just a space as a technical space, but also as a symbolic space. And so you can produce something else. And to me, that's exciting because it's a reciprocal kind of dialogue. So you are changing what you're doing. Also, the space has to rethink its own function. And that's, to me,
it's also cross-disciplinary in a way.
Yeah, but in the positive way, because then the problem today is that the transdisciplinary is using really as a sort of flag that everybody are waving. The problem is a bit like when you say all this museum, doing this immersive thing, because then is what people are looking for is experience, because the counterpart of being all the time on Instagram, on Tinder, on YouTube, on Spotify is that you want the real experience as well. And that's what's happening. So the resurgence of the live, so the dimension of liveness, So think about concerts. There was a certain point where the live was very like unpopular. There were not so many people. Now it's huge. It seems going back to the 90s, early 2000s. It's quite big. And I think, I'm not sure, I think that is also connected to that. And so that is the liveness is also related to the need of the experience. Also think of the, even in London, New York, in cities, like how fashionable is becoming the poetry readings, the spoken word. People, they want to gather. It's about an excuse to get together. And so that's, to me, interesting.
As well as like a book, as well as like a printed or physical object. I was at Off-Print in the Turbine Hall last week, 2 weeks ago. I mean, it was incredible. Like if you just saw it from that podium above, it was just filled with people. It was really, really amazing. So I think
in fact, is a fair presented in an institution as an event. Because the same thing, if that Off-Print was an exhibition lasting for 3 months, with vitrines and tables, no one will ever go. They love because is perceived as an event, also as a social event.
Exactly.
So they go there and they stroll through this thing. It's not that you are into artist books or publishing. You walk, you meet, you feel it's cool, you drink a beer, you meet people, you smoke, blah, blah, blah. And that's the thing. So it's, so the problem is like, as the organizer, you can use that as an opportunity to bring in people that otherwise will never be interested in that stuff. At the same time, you have to pay attention that that thing is not completely like suppressing what you're doing. Because otherwise the risk is becoming you're serving the food for just for a kind of cultural entertainment, but then is entertainment that is just leaving nothing, that that kid or person is going there, we know, you know, as is going to whatever, to a beer context in a square, with just the difference there are some like art books in between.
And so you as a curator then, this is, I guess that's what you have to consider every time you put a show up. Is it like how?
Yeah, to me, this is the main preoccupation, how to be not self-referential and at the same time keeping very high the level of experimentation, of also giving the artist like the opportunity to make something different, because also artists themselves are part of this. There are some often artists that are afraid to do something, to experiment, because they're too busy, or they're just, you know, everyone in this world, everything became so professionalized, and also artists, they become like that. So we don't, the artists are not excluded, so they have their own like responsibilities. And so when I do exhibitions, to me is that's the main challenge, not to obey to the rules of being how to be generous, but at the same time being radical. And so often you know, using working with a certain type of graphic designer, or using a certain type of context. Like last week, I organized a one-day exhibition with Michel Oder, this French New York-based filmmaker who is now 82 years old. And I organized it 8 hours project of his movies, 21 different films he made from between 1967 and today, in a porn cinema that was for free. And the cinema is a cinema from the late 70s, left untouched, including open ceiling to smoke. and they do porn, is still operating as a porn cinema. They do only analog porn from the 70s, hetero. Instead, the audience is gay, is a gay audience with escorts, very kind of cruising sort of.
But they play straight porn.
Straight porn.
That's brilliant.
And it came, 2,000 people came. I asked, I wanted to have a bar inside. So it's just that's a good example, you know. Without the bar, I'm sure a lot of people would have left. But I also decided to promote this exhibition as almost as a rock concert, not a screening of experimental films.
Yes.
And that's an example of when I'm saying how to keep something that is quite experimental, in the sense that these movies are quite experimental, these films. And the economy of attention of that generation is really, really tiny. When I ask my students how often you go to the cinema, once, twice a year. And already, if you look, even if you watch Mad Max, they get bored after 10 minutes. So even with the most like action sort of loaded type of movies, the attention is quite. And instead of that environment, they felt, okay, let's watch this. It's a bit like the spoken, the poetry readings thing. People feel that, okay, I want to be part of this. And so I spend time, even if it's not really my cup of tea. And that's, to me, a quite exciting thing, instead of doing this project at the Cinematheque, where you have a group of people that really love Michel Oder and they already know, and they're nerd, and say, oh, it's exciting now that we're watching this movie from 1971. I prefer someone that has no idea what it is, that is really like digesting it in its own way. Maybe wrong, not perfect, but a bit more personal. Maybe that experience can produce something. While for the other that already knows, is a film critic, it enters is something improving that knowledge, but it enters and ended up here because it's already structured. The other, is like when you taste something, a new flavor, or like a new food when you're a baby, is like it open up a new way of reading the world.
It's like watching that. I remember when I first saw The Clock. Is it Clock? The 24.
Yeah, Christian Markley.
Yes, when I first saw it, it was at Tate, and I just by accident just walked into it. I didn't really know what it was. And that's that visceral experience that you're talking about. Like, like 5 minutes of you realizing that how the whole system works. And then I saw it at MoMA a few months ago, and there was nothing, like you don't feel anything because it's revealed to you completely. But then my students were really like it. There was a real kind of sense of discovery. So there's something
when the clock was presented at Sadie Coles in London in the gallery was open 24 hours. Was White Cube, I think, a gallery, a commercial gallery in London. Being a 24 hours functional also kind of clock, you had people like kids going out of clubs and entering at 5 in the morning in a gallery watching. That's, to me, besides the work, that's, to me, it creates a strange encounters, because kids would never go in a gallery. And already like experiencing an exhibition during the night is still exciting, because it's different and we're not used to that, and so affects like our perception of things.
Yeah, but and it's interesting that institutions close, that they have working hours, and so this what you're saying about pushing beyond that by kind of different forms of presenting is actually probably maybe like the only way to actually show the works.
Or also you wonder, but if most of the people, they have like office hours, so working from 10 to 6, why museums should not be open from, I don't know, 4 till 11. That would be the most natural thought to anyone observing the world, you know?
And so are there any, so sorry, yes, the question I just had as we were talking about this idea of encounter of something new, I think that's maybe where the previous point that you made about discovering an artist that we haven't seen before, or an artist that we are not wired to kind of experience. I mean, how do you do that? How do you go about it? Of course, like, you go and see the world and you're constantly probably seeing and reading and watching things, and you're in this process of discovery yourself. But what's the kind of test for a work that is going to have that potent energy? Do you have something? Do you have like a...
I don't know, because it really depends from case to case. Like, an example, like the cinema thing, I was just walking there. Someone told me there was the cinema. I visited it. When I entered and I witnessed that situation, and I thought it would be cool to do something here. So I thought, okay, an artist using movie images. And then I thought, okay, Michel films and imagery is really this, because it's about life, it's about no narrative, just like framing reality and, you know, extracting from that his own way on that. And very often his movies are like, it's about also sex, drugs. I mean, it's about life. And so his movies stink of life. And that place, the cinema, there is a very strong smell. It stinks. And then I thought, okay, that's perfect. So that's if I was another curator, I would opt maybe for another artist. And same when I'm thinking about, you know, if I'm programming in a museum, maybe if the museum is, I can think about the context, I can think about, as I said before, to giving space to those who didn't get the opportunity to show in institutions. Could be like inviting figures that are from other field to kind of respond to this context, or simply by, you know, you read something. And when I did an exhibition in the sky, and I used the banners that were, you know, trained by the airplanes, advertising aerial banners. I thought about Lawrence Wiener immediately, because I thought who's an artist working with language, and but could have been that same exhibition could also have been a group show where I was asking different artists to come up with a work made of words for a banner. Instead, to me, that was Lawrence Wiener. You know, so it's very hard about, you know, how you pick up things. Of course, is as I said, I'm not someone that is really so linear that I'm picking up a theme and then I find the work of the artist to respond to the theme. Often could be the space that is evoking or suggesting something, or it could be that I reading and like researching on some artist, then kind of connecting the dots, you know. But it's very spontaneous.
But your kind of mode of working, or your mode of just being a curator, is that kind of something like being in a forest and you're just constantly like going like a kind of tropical rainforest that is endless, or have you created a set of parameters within which you're...
I don't know. No, I don't know if there are some parameters. The parameters maybe is always put myself as the first person to judge, and as me as a visitor, and try really to you know, I'm my first kind of critic, and I'm very honest. So I always trying to push to beat myself really until I was dead. And so, okay, now now we can talk. So this avoid being self-referential and trying my best way to address different like audience and being faithful to the radicality of the artist thinking and way of working. So it's about being, to me, the relationship with the art is very, very important. And so I'll try to give the artist the opportunity to do something exciting and where you feel something different from what is done. So for instance, Michel, he was very moved and I'm talking about this show because it's the last thing just happened. Yeah. And he's a good example. He's an artist that was the first time I was working with him. I've been following his work for a long, long time. And then appeared the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Because that was the right moment. And yeah, so maybe there are some inner parameters that I don't even know. Maybe they're so kind of natural. But to me, yeah, it's really, when I say that it's an ongoing exploration, it's like being in this forest is really, it's not just a rhetoric way of saying. It's really, because if I'm not in that condition, I lose the adrenaline and also the you know, the need to also, you know, getting excited. I have that thing of being excited and like share this excitement with artists, just because I still believe that there are some like great works, great artists, great stuff that need to be shared. It's about sharing and in the best way, and also sharing with people that they don't usually have the opportunity or the same tools to get there.
I think one word that you've maybe used a few times, and I wonder whether that's maybe one of those kind of things that you orientate yourself towards, is radicalism. So you said radical a few times. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, what do you have tests for what's radical? How do you define radicalism?
Able to kind of to pursue a certain kind of trajectory in a way that is not about going from A to Z like this, but since you're aware that is not the reality, able to kind of doing a parcours that is a bit more articulated, and you have to respond to these obstacles, but this is affecting your way of kind of doing that trajectory, but not the attitude. That the thing at the end, so it will be like you reach the Z, but it's about the how. And during this kind of parcours, you're also affected, but not in the how, you know, you're really obsessed about, you know, it's very hard to describe what is that ultimate achievement, because to me, to put in words, because being radical is also the intelligence of responding to the constraints without, you know, affecting the spirit of it. And which is also the case. Often we go back to the Mark Fisher and how do we relate to capitalism, and how you can be radical, or like the way you can work within institutions. That's to me the radical. And the political, the radicality is how to combine the poetic and the political, you know, without the compromise of, you know, diminishing it, but with the intelligence and with the necessity of responding to these kind of obstacles, but not in the way that you obey to them, but you have to relate to these obstacles and to these interferences, that you embrace them, and they're becoming something that could be, you know, some added values, not a compromise.
But then in terms of the output, in terms of what we see, I mean, is it the documentation? I think maybe there's a lot of, I think somehow I recognize a kind of strong sensibility towards documentation of these processes, maybe in the work that, I mean, I say you're attracted to, but that you've been curating. How does this manifest?
You mean the question about documentation, or is about the?
Well, I guess it's kind of a manifestation of the radicalism, but then also because you're saying that it's about the journey and it's this kind of uncompromising yet kind of expansive journey, then I guess if it's about the journey, then it's not about the final outcome, but then maybe there's something about the documentation of the process that.
No, it's about the journey and about the outcome. It's more about, like, as I was saying, instead of going from this point to another point, it's like you made a journey that is not so linear, but then the whole thing is about getting there and doing it. But sometimes you know, sometimes also the outcome could be very different. Sometimes also there are projects that are really playing with the idea of the ephemeral, and others that are working completely towards the other relationship. So I think sometimes time could be really the main space for those projects, and in other cases completely different. I'm just saying that to me radical is also being capable of understanding how to face what's happening during the trip from A to Z, meaning from the idea and to what you want to realize without no compromise. So I think that is today the most important thing. Is like, you know, being a DJ, you can say, this is very radical because he's playing the entire like list of tracks they wanted to play without giving a shit to his audience. Or instead, if maybe, you know, there is a technical problem, you have to use just one CDJ. So instead of sticking to the idea that you're still playing, pretending that the second is functioning, you reinvent your way of playing that set, not the way of DJing in your life, just that one. And so you invent something different. That's, to me, the practical example to say that. So in that case, is happening an obstacle, there is an accident. So instead of sticking and continuing towards the set like this, you do like that. And so you find a different way of playing. And that's, to me, what I find. This, to me, is more radical instead of sticking to the idea of playing with two DJs, even if one is broken.
And then if you just marry that, I love that. And then if you marry that to this idea of documentation, I mean, it's the things that, you know, an art historian will then be able to look at as your output as a radical artist. That is quite interesting, I guess. And so if you were to kind of, if you are unpicking or showing a work of a radical artist that was radical in the 60s or 70s, what you have is not that experience. You don't have that, but you have somehow kind of the leftovers, the pieces of paper, and I guess
it's also about the way you how to you relate to that, because it's about the practice, you know, it's about studying. So maybe since maybe for the radicality of that artist was the attitude, not so much the outcome. So the outcome, the result. Instead of thinking, okay, I do the show of the leftovers, even if I'm aware that that's are not the main thing, I can think in different ways. So how can I show the attitude without showing the leftovers? That's the type of. And maybe, but you don't have an answer, so you have to start thinking, and you have to question yourself, because usually the easiest thing would be to show the leftovers, but then it's no sense. And but of course it's much easier to do that, and instead try to think, okay, or maybe you say, okay, maybe for this sort of project is more interest to make a book.
Mm-hmm.
When I visit this Biennial of Architecture, I found one of the most boring experiences I've done recently. I said, but why you don't make a book?
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm really like.
I came to the macro maybe 2 years ago. I really just wanted to see, and of course I discovered all the other things that were really, it was really good. But I came to see the Robert Smithson's drawings and letters, and that was really amazing because it was the work that's not seen very much. I mean, it's not what he is known for.
Yeah.
In a way, the works were kind of very conventionally presented, but it's a part of the psychology of the artist that we don't know, and the letters were beautifully written. So that was quite nice, even though it was kind of conventional in its form.
Yeah, but because I it's a bit like when you cook the fish.